Hi, I'm Jay Thomas, and welcome to Bald Tires, a proud member of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. My guest today is somebody who I think has played a pretty crucial role in me, myself, becoming a car guy throughout the years. You know, I think, like our country that we live in that's so diverse, the car community is also very diverse, and there are people that are interested in all aspects of vehicles. Today, we're talking to my Uncle Collin, who's from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and he also owns Action Cycle, one of the last true blue motorcycle repair shops around. But my uncle has always been interested in the cool European stuff, the small stuff, the stuff that's light and nimble. We're going to go over some of the amazing European sports cars my uncle has owned over the years, throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s, even ones that he owns to this day. So sit back and relax and enjoy this episode called On the Lighter Side. Thanks for listening to Bald Tires, because when you make great memories, you make bald tires. The Saskatchewan Podcast Network is supported by Connexus. Connexus Credit Union is all about their members. Improving their financial well-being drives everything they do. And that's not just something they say. It's a promise that's delivered by over 900 employees across Saskatchewan. Their employees are members too, and they've been there. So they're committed to making your money work for you. The banking industry needs to change, and Connexus is changing it for everyone, because Connexus cares. Visit connexus.ca to learn more. The Saskatchewan Podcast Network is also supported by Direct West. Is marketing getting in the way of running your business? Direct West has a local, expert team right here in Saskatchewan that will work with you to build your website exactly how you imagine it. Let them help you improve your online presence, and head to directwest.com to learn more. Well, I made a road trip down to Moose Jaw, and I'm sitting in my uncle's shop right now, and I've got my uncle Collin Cossette with me. Uncle, thanks for joining the show.
Hey, it's fun.
Thanks a lot. Okay, you know what? I've had lots of people on who have talked about American stuff, North American built cars. That's been, kind of what I drive in a way with my old 69 Buick, but you've always been the cool uncle who's been interested in the European stuff and the import stuff, and that goes back a long way. So I thought we might take a chance to talk a bit about some of the cars you've owned in the past. Now, your dad, my grandpa, was stationed in Germany with the RCAF from 1963 or so to 1965, something like that? 66?
Yeah, it was 63 to 66, I think.
Yeah. So you were like 10 years old when you went over there?
Yeah,
something like
that's
that?
right.
Up to 13. So you probably remember a lot of the vehicles you saw over there.
Oh, yes, yeah. Yep, because I was a bit of a car guy there, too. And, I remember seeing, so that's right when an American personnel, because this was on a big military base.
Yeah.
The base population was like 180,000 people. It was a NATO base, Ramstein. And I can remember where an American bought a brand new Camaro. They had just come out and had it shipped over there. And he had it, we were up I was down looking from a balcony in an apartment-style block. And there it was. It was sort of a copperish, goldish kind of Camaro. It was the first year out. And he was there cleaning it up a bit, polishing it, and that kind of thing. Another thing I remember was actually a Citroen. So a military guy from France bought a brand new Citroen. And he had it for a few months, and then I'm looking down the balcony, and he had literally stripped the fenders off of it right in the parking lot and was cleaning behind the fenders. Like he unbolted all the fenders.
Can't do that these days.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So I was always interested in cars back then.
Did you get to see some really fantastic European stuff there? Like,
oh yeah,
stuff that we wouldn't have had in Canada at that point in history, right? I mean, I know Mercedes, for example, was in Canada, but those were very, very expensive vehicles here, where that was more common, things like that, and BMWs, early stuff, right?
That's right. Yeah. Well, I already told you about, but I'll bring up the story where one of the first cars my dad purchased there was a big, huge Plymouth station wagon. And while gas price is really high there, even now, versus here. We think the gas price is high here, but it's way higher over in Europe.
That's right.
And so that's part of the reason they drive smaller vehicles there generally, because the fuel economy is way more important So, but Dad bought this big Plymouth, and it sucked gas. But more noticeably, we couldn't get it through some of the German towns because it was so big and the roads are so narrow that we just couldn't get through. So we had to go around these towns. So finally, then the transmission went when we were going down an Autobahn, and so enough of that. And we went, my dad purchased a brand new Volkswagen Squareback station wagon right from the factory. And so we drove to the factory and picked it up there. And I remember that, going to the factory. So it was a Volkswagen
Was it
factory.
like Wolfsburg, like that famous
Yeah,
factory?
I couldn't tell you what, but I couldn't tell you now where it was exactly. But I don't think it was all that far from the big base there, the big NATO base, because I don't think we drove a long time. But anyways, when we would go down the Autobahn as a family, and then I'd sit in the very back, and of course that's where the engine was under.
Yeah.
The engine was below the floor, and I did put my ear to the floor, and I could hear the motor just thrumming. And of course, you're going at a much higher rate of speed there on the Autobahn versus here. So even in the slow lane, he had that thing almost matted out. So we're probably, I don't know what we're doing. I don't know how
75 or 80 miles an hour?
Yeah. So we're probably doing around,
because it was in kilometers back then too,
yeah,
right?
Oh yeah, well that's.
So do you think a Squareback would do 130, 140, maybe flat out? That's probably all it could do.
Yeah, it would have.
It would have about that though, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now that station wagon, then I know I remember seeing pictures that Grandpa picked up a little like camper that even went behind that, right?
Yeah, he pulled a camper behind that.
Can you imagine like a little flat four in a Volkswagen with 5 people in it, like 2 adults and 3 kids, and a trunk full of stuff, and a little tent trailer going over the Alps?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Nobody would dare tow with something like that anymore, but that was common back then in Europe,
very
right?
common over there. Well, again, it's way more smaller vehicles. So, like, you would see quite a few of those small Messerschmitt cars, the ones with the whole front is a
right?
bubble and flips up.
Yeah.
So you would see those running around. But you'd see mostly small cars. You couldn't take big cars. So a big car over there, the German people, so if you had a Mercedes-Benz four-door sedan, that was pretty big there. And then anybody who owned bigger cars was considered wealthy. You must be wealthy to be able to drive that. So later on, Dad bought a 62 Ford Fairlane with a 260 V8 in it, which over here would be considered, I think it was not a compact car, but a mid-size car.
Right.
But over there, the Germans all thought it was the size of a Mercedes, so the Germans all thought we must be really wealthy to be driving something like that. But at least that one we could make it down most of the streets in the towns, small German towns, but not all of them, because it was still just a little too big. But over here, they'd say, oh, what a cute car that Ford Fairlane was. But over there, that was a big, huge car. So by comparison.
You're about 13 when you came back to Canada.
Yeah.
And the next assignment for Grandpa in the RCAF was Yorkton, right?
Yes.
So were you 16 when you were living in Yorkton and got your driver's license?
Yeah, well, I was still 15 when we actually bought my first car, which was a 1962 Austin A60 station wagon. And so I didn't have my license yet.
Yeah. But
my dad bought this off another airman who was working on the base there. And he had painted it orange. And of course the rocker panels, they were rusting a bit, so we painted them black. And then I went and got one of these 4, 6, 8-cylinder tachometers.
Yeah.
And it was a big chrome thing, and I mounted it right in the dash, so much so that I had to look to the side of it to be able to see. And it really didn't work right. It kept going, fluttering between them. But it just looked cool. That was the main thing.
So what, like that car had a little tiny 4-cylinder engine in it?
Yeah, it had a 4-cylinder. Wasn't super tiny for the day. I think it was something like actually 15 or 1600 cc engine in it, but they didn't have a lot of power, not like more modern cars do. But yeah, it it was geared short, so it revved pretty high on the highway.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're doing 65 mile an hour, that thing was really revving.
Well, I don't think it was meant to even go that, like,
No.
based on coming from Europe, right?
Right,
I mean, I don't think, the freeways in England, where it came from, really were that fast of speeds anyways, right?
Yeah, well, that's the problem with a lot of the British cars back then, is then they came over here, they really weren't set up for our environment, our higher road speeds and wide open spaces.
Yeah.
So in England, the roads are shorter and more twistier and narrower and stuff like that. And in the rest of Europe too. But anyways, it was pretty cool. And it was pretty cool in that, yeah, the heaters sucked and it was cool in the wintertime. And not much for defrost. And that was another issue with a lot of the British cars. They didn't have very good heaters,
How about electrical? Like, that's always known to be a problem with.
Yeah, that would crop up. Although I didn't have that many electrical problems, really, with my British cars that I owned.
So that Austin
Yeah.
that you had, that was your first car, how long did you have it for?
Oh, I had it for quite some time, I guess, but I don't recall exactly how long. But eventually we sold it to a restaurant owner next to my uncle's, Andy's Transport, on Circle Drive in Saskatoon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he bought it. But anyways, before that, my rocker panels were rusting so badly, and I was trying to figure out what to do, and my uncle went and got some sheet metal bent, and we just riveted it on place, and I was so happy because I had brand new rocker panels.
Boy, that feels like a story that I had, huh?
Yes, it does.
And
yeah,
that you played a part in that too, because my first car was in my '81 Honda Civic, which belonged to Grandpa, your dad. And yeah, I remember I think it was my 15th birthday. I couldn't even drive yet, and you for my birthday got me reproduction rocker panels and quarter panels and the rear fender edge for that Civic. And yeah, that was about the same job I did. It was riveting them on and Bondo and rattle cans, and I had a brand new car. It looked great.
Yeah.
Don't look underneath, but it looked great.
Yeah. And I helped Dad get that brand new Civic there in '81. So we bought that through where I was working in Saskatoon. I was a manager for some Honda motorcycles and at a place, and then we also dealt with Thomas Motors in Nipawin, who sold them. So we made a deal, and that's how Dad got that brand new '81 Civic 1300 with a
5-speed.
5-speed, yeah, and then you ended up with that eventually.
That's right. And even my little sister Amy. And you know what? I still have the original key and the original key tag from Thomas Motors in Nipawin.
Okay.
It was saved somehow, and I've still got it. But
yeah.
So okay, you had the Austin as your first car.
Yeah.
But you had a whole series of really cool British cars and some European stuff, not just British, but some European stuff after that. So what was the next car that came along for you?
Well, I think I bought after that a 1970 Cortina Gt Four-Door, the gold with stripes four-door. So the Cortina GT, what was cool to me was, and because I was more attracted to the European stuff, so some of the European stuff, they had actual wood dashes.
Yeah.
And that's what that Ford Cortina had, was a high polished wood dash in there. That's what I really liked.
Now, for anybody who's listening who doesn't know that car, that was like the predecessor in Europe to the Escort, right?
Yeah, well, they were sold together. The Cortina was a huge, one of the biggest sellers there for Ford in Europe. And it was imported over here, but over there, that was their main volume seller over there. Their number one volume seller, actually. So the Escort was sold alongside the Cortina, but the Escort was a little smaller.
Oh, okay.
So over there, the Cortina was considered a that'd be the equivalent of a full-size family sedan here in the 70s. The GT model was extra special in that it was a little more performance-orientated sedan. So if you still don't know what those Cortinas look like, if anybody knows what a Datsun 510 was, that was from the area, they were a similar boxy sort of look to them. But anyways, the GT had special performance shocks and springs and anti-sway bar, and they had the engine they had hopped up again, like Ford. They had actual tubular header standard. They had a 2-barrel Weber, a little more aggressive cam, and they had a little higher compression pistons in it. So it was a fairly zippy, peppy thing. And it had down the side, they had 2 black stripes going all the way down the side. So over in England now, people that restore them, collect them, all that kind of stuff. And the GT particularly is sought after. So they had regular Cortinas, and then they had the GT model, and they had a couple other variations. They had an E model. And then they also had a Lotus Cortina. So that was a Cortina where was modified by Lotus. So
that was a partnership between Lotus and Ford,
yes,
though, right?
So Lotus took the standard 1600s push motor. Then they used that engine block. Well, they used the older version, which was a 1500. And then when they went to the 1600, that was a cross-flow head, meaning on one side there's the intake and the carburetor, on the other side's the exhaust. Whereas in the older style, they'd be both on the same side.
Okay. Yep.
So the cross-flow was a little more efficient, made a little more power. But the 1500 block they used and then the Lotus developed a double overhead cam or a twin cam aluminum head for it. So it had quite a bit more performance, and it was based on the older 1500 block, which actually Lotus punched out to 1558. So I had the Cortina GT, and then later on I sold that, and I got the Lotus Cortina. And so the Lotus Cortina is a very super collectible car. Over there, that's like the equivalent of a Dodge Hemi Cuda with a 426 in it and, and a 4-speed. That's what a Lotus Cortina is. So over there, it was the everyday man's performance vehicle.
Right.
You could still haul the family, yet it had quite a bit of performance. Now, over in Europe, performance has a different meaning than North America. So performance over there is more encompassing everything, handling, braking, how it turns and feels and all that kind of stuff. Whereas in that era, performance over here in North America meant more what it does in the straight line, quarter mile, and that kind of thing. Yeah,
brakes weren't always great.
So those Lotus Cortinas, it was just a few years ago when I was visiting you and your mom and dad in Saskatoon, and we went to a bookshop there, and I went scouring the magazines, and on a rack was a British car magazine. It was sort of like a retro Ford type thing, and in there, finally, I seen they featured Lotus Cortinas. Now, most of the time, the Lotus Cortinas were the Mark I. They were the older body style with little fins on the back and everything. But when they later revised them into the more boxier kind of look, and that was the Mark II. And that's what I had.
Okay.
So I had a Mark II, but I never seen much on the Mark II. But finally, there was an article from Britain, and in there, and they said, well, the values. So a little bit rougher, tattier Lotus Cortina, in the equivalent to Canadian dollars, they had it listed in British pounds, but I think it was something like in tatty or rough condition, something like equivalent of $20,000. And then one in average shape was like, say, $40,000 to $60,000, and one in premium shape was over $100,000.
Wow.
So when I seen that, I went, "Oh my God!" But over here, it's not thought of that way because they just kind of all went away, and wasn't thought about that way. But over there, yeah, that's like has real serious meaning, and it is exactly like if you mention 426 Hemi Cuda, people know generally what that means.
Yeah. Or
but over there, a Lotus Cortina, that's what it means over there.
Or a Shelby Mustang,
Right.
For example, right?
Yep.
GT350. Everybody knows what that kind of means over here.
So they actually have more value than the actual Lotus models did generally, just because it was more usable, practical performance car that a person could put, not just a two-seater, but their family in it.
So the first one you had was a 4-door.
Yeah.
The second one, the Lotus Cortina, that was the first one was a GT. The second one was a 2-door?
Yeah, the Lotus Cortinas were only in two-door. Yeah.
They were 2-door sedans, though, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And they were raced on the racetrack. So, well-known racer Jim Clark, he raced them. And actually, there's pictures of them on the track at the same time with all things the Ford Galaxie 500, which is a big, huge car, the big honker.
Yep.
So you see, the Americans, or North Americans, didn't quite understand power to weight there, and they figured they'd stomp all these puny little European cars on the track because they had all this much more power. But these things weighed twice as much, and here, sure, they had more power, but they wouldn't handle all that well around corners. So they actually raced against them. But the Cortinas would race against the Alfa Romeos and the BMWs, those kind of cars there. But the Lotus Cortina especially, they won all kinds of things back in Europe, all kinds of things. So it had a heck of a reputation.
Okay. Couple Cortinas, Lotus Cortina. What else after that?
Fiat X19. The first year they were out. I didn't buy it new. I bought it used, and it was lime green. So 1974 Fiat X19. And that's if you don't know what that is, it's almost like a mini Ferrari. It's a mid-engine car, 1300 cc.
Pop-up headlights?
Pop-up headlights, mid-engine, and disc brakes all the way around. Pretty exotic car, actually. And you think, well, 1300. But again, the car was pretty light, very light. So what are we talking weights here? Well, I think my Lotus Cortina, I'm thinking would have weighed around 1,800 pounds.
Gosh.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the Fiat was somewhere around there, anyways. Yeah. So power to weight. Again, you don't need a lot of power if you're lightweight.
No.
And yeah, so I had the Fiat, and we even drove down to California with it, my cousin and myself. And the Fiat has a removable hardtop that comes off. And it's got an exotic sound to it too.
That's pretty cool. Yeah.
And I thought that after having some other British cars, and later some British cars, so I thought that was. And I did skip over quite a few cars there now that I'm thinking about it. So actually, after that, before the Fiat, I had an MGB.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
What year?
67 MGB, light blue one.
And you were living in Saskatoon at this time.
That's right.
Did you drive these cars all year?
Yeah.
Because that's in
the wintertime.
Yeah, that's a little car, right? An MGB is a pretty little light car.
Convertible.
Yeah, and a convertible too.
Yeah.
And you actually
but I had
got
a
around.
hardtop for it, and I had a tonneau cover. But yeah, they were. Yeah, but in those days, a sports car was only a sports car if it was a convertible. So, really, if you had a hard top, really, for the most part, I'm generalizing here. But that's how I looked at it anyways, and my friends at the time. So sports car, well, immediately you pictured some kind of convertible. That was a sports car. Convertible, smaller European car, not a convertible American car.
So MGB, then comes the Fiat X19, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yes.
And that car lasted how long?
Oh, I had that for quite a while. Sold it to our cousin Brian. He actually wanted to buy it.
Oh, really?
I did. Yeah. And I think eventually he blew up the engine. But
now, okay, so you also, you said, you told me a story a little while ago. You did finally break down and buy an American car once too.
Yeah, that was in the era when I still had the Lotus Cortina, and I was always envious of people who could readily go down to Canadian Tire, go anywhere easily, and pick up parts for their American cars.
Yeah,
and the parts were cheap. Well, in those days, no internet or nothing, and it was really difficult to find parts often. The Ford dealers still carried some stuff. Like I could buy some stuff still from the Ford
for a
dealer,
Cortina, yeah.
For Cortina. But other stuff and the other British cars, yeah, it was much more difficult getting parts in that. And so I went and bought a 1970 Mustang with a 351 Cleveland, but it was an automatic,
Okay.
which kind of sucked. Automatics back then, they were 3-speed automatics, and when you have a standard, you had more gears, and they were quite a bit faster. And so that was the performance cars always had a manual. You didn't have automatics back then. That was for your girlfriend or the little old ladies. And so I had that. It was not a fastback though. It was a notchback. And I drove that around for a while, and it was pretty good in a straight line. But after I jumped back into the Lotus Cortina, well, that was like a go-kart by comparison.
Yeah.
So the Mustang, really, it was flaccid handling. The handling and everything were not in the same realms.
No.
Now, you can do stuff with them now, of course. I understand that. And the more modern, newer Mustangs or Camaros, yeah, they handle really good too.
Yeah, it's a different story now.
Yes,
totally.
Yeah. But back then, people bought the performance American cars for the straight line speed, not for handling.
Yeah, that's right.
And but anyways, that was just too boring to drive actually, so I sold it. But also on top of that, there was a fair bit of rust going on there. But it was just not my thing after I drove it for a while. Now,
you eventually started working at the Saskatoon dealership, Merlin Ford.
Yeah.
Merlin Ford Lincoln back then, right?
Merlin Motors.
Merlin Motors. Now, you were, there was some pretty cool stuff that Ford was bringing over, even in 1983, right? That you got to kind of check out and look after.
Yeah, I mean, they had a meeting, got all the salesmen from both Jubilee and Merlin together, and the Ford came over with a pre-production prototype Mustang SVO. So the Mustang SVO is like everybody knows the Mustangs with the V8s.
It's a Fox body.
And yes. And that was their attempt at producing a more neutral handling car, and that had a turbocharged 4-cylinder engine in, which most of the Mustang crowd kind of went, huh? But it in magazines like Car and Driver, Road and Track, they were lauded for their great handling and everything versus the other Mustangs with the V8. So the Mustangs with the V8, they are very heavy in the front end, and they tend to plow when you're trying to steer. So, so anyways, but the thing is, when you're really going at a speed and you're trying to turn hard, and they want to tend to go forward, they want to keep going.
Yeah.
And because they got so much weight on the front end, they start to plow. Well, the SVO, so they had the Ford was introducing it, and we went into the hotel building, and in a big meeting room, they had a film running, and they were talking about how well they had reduced the turbocharged lag.
Mm-hmm.
And so most of your listeners should know what that means.
Well, I mean, that was a big problem back when
Yes.
turbos came out,
Yes. So
right?
turbo's lag is when you put your foot into it, it takes a little while for the turbo to spool up and actually produce boost, and then you go.
So
There's a little bit of a lag before the power
yeah.
kicks in. You push the pedal down, and there's a lag, and then the power kicks in. So it's not great for handling or for predicting
What it's going to do.
what's going to do.
Right.
But they were making a big thing out of, and the engineers were there, how they reduced the lag of this turbo and that whatnot. So they gave us all the goods on this SVO, and had the bi-wing on there, really looked cool. Had more of a European-style sport handling suspension. So that's what attracted me.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, they had a prescribed course laid out in Saskatoon for all the salesmen to drive it. So I waited to the very last, and I went to get in it, and this other salesman jumps in with me, this guy, and I said, "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm going to come along with you." But anyways, I said, "I don't think you really want to do that." "Oh, yeah, no, I'll come along." So he comes along. Well, I didn't follow the prescribed route. That wasn't too long after they had built the Circle Drive S, coming from Circle Drive there, and to get on the main one, there's real nice S curves going down.
Yep.
And so I wound that SVO up going around those curves, and boy, I was really impressed because it did handle neutral, didn't plow, and everything went around there almost like a European car. And so when I stopped to switch to this guy, Bob, he said, "Don't ever do that again." He was just, I guess I just terrified him.
It was kind of like that scene out of Ford versus Ferrari where
yeah, it was kind of like that.
Ford goes along in the ride in the Ford GT and crying by the end,
yes,
right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
No, it actually, that was one of the first, I think, American-style performance car that handled pretty darn good.
Yeah.
And that's because the handling was balanced. The weight was better balanced. And they put a lot of effort into the suspension, too, to get it to really handle well. And I remember, too, it had a switch that you can switch from regular fuel to premium. Electronic switch. And by doing that, so if you had to run regular, it'd back off the timing or something, and you would reduce the power.
Because it was fuel injected, obviously, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was the SVO story.
So did you have a role to play in a lot of those getting sold in Saskatoon?
Well, of course, the SVO was Ford, where I worked at Merlin Motors, which was Mercury. Now,
Lincoln,
what happened was then Mercury imported, again, the sedan that replaced the Cortina series in Europe was called the Sierra.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a high volume. Over there, a little bit bigger, family-type sedan.
Right.
So when they brought it over here, they couldn't use the Sierra name because what GM called their one car.
Right.
Which even though the spelling was different.
Well, and
so they had to come up with something else. So then somebody had a not so bright theory that, well, let's call it what the German word for Mercury. So it was Merkur, and it was an XR4 Ti. Two-door. They only brought over the performance version, but instead of the V6, they had the turbocharged
2.3 liter four-cylinder.
Similar engine that was in the SVO Mustang. But in the Merkur, it actually, so when the SVO first came out, I think a little later on they might have increased the power, but the Merkur came out and had a little more power than the SVO.
Okay.
And then later on, it was something like 185 horsepower or something. And then later on, the later versions, they got it over 200. I think it was 200 or 210 or 215, I think, what it was. And so that was pretty ahead of its time in a lot of ways when you look at that. That's a common thing now, have a turbo 4. But the point was that, but the Mercury was a European sedan. They competed against BMW. That had an independent rear suspension too and everything. So it was a definite European car. But that name was kind of goofy to North Americans. What the hell? And how do you spell it? And how do you say it? So anyways, they started selling it. And then my manager, Ron Adams, we got together and I said, we should do an ad, some kind of TV commercial for this thing and do it right. So actually, he let me develop the whole thing, and we took a car down to the TV station downtown, and they filmed it. I gave them a script, and the people at the TV station thought the wording was too long, but it was on purpose the way I set it all up. So, yeah, we set it all up. We had one of the guys put in some skis in the back because, that was what they did over in Europe, the hatchback, and then you could fold down to one seat and put skis in there. So we did all that, had the TV commercials. And it ended up later being a big success. A lot of people didn't know this existed, and so it caused them to have pretty good sales. But that happened then after I had left there.
Okay.
Actually.
Yeah.
But because I went back there to visit, and a couple of soldiers said, "Oh man, I'm really selling those Mercurys."
Okay, so you worked in, like I say, with Merlin Ford, 83, 82, 85, 86, something like that, right? And there's a car out in the garage that I remember as a kid that I want to talk about. It is, what year is that? It's a 74
Mercury Capri. Now, those were the German Capris.
Right. So it's not the Capri version of the Mustang, the Fox body thing, yes. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So what happened is, again, Ford, and they let the Mercury side handle the European cars more so.
Right.
So the Cortinas, and they had other ones too, but the XR4 Ti, but the Capri, they started importing that in I think '69, and it was basically what they did is look at the sales success of the Mustang over in North America, but the Mustang, again, was just too big of a car for over there, for the roads. So they made a kind of a more smaller version of the Mustang, and they called it the Capri, and it came out with various engines over the year, but it came out in 68 or 9, and first had a 1600 four-cylinder engine, the same that was in the Cortina, actually.
Okay, yeah.
At first. Later on, a 2-liter overhead cam engine. And then they came out with the small German V6, and originally it was a 2.6 liter. And then later on, they punched it out to 2.8, made some changes, primarily in the heads. They had Siamese exhaust ports in the 2.6, and in the 2.8 they had separate exhaust ports, which gave it more performance advantages, and they upgraded the engine.
Is that known as the Cologne V6?
Yes.
Okay,
yep.
so
now,
2.8. That's what's in the one you have, right?
Right. Yeah. So that one, they also had in England, they had their own separate V6, which they sold. They never sold that over here. So the V6 engine over there was different. It was actually a little bit bigger. I think it was 3.1 liter, and it was a totally different one. But the one we got was the German V6.
Now yours is a 73.
74.
That's considered Mark 1 though, right?
Yeah, it was the last year for the Mark 1. So the 73 had the 2.6 as an option. You can get the 2-liter inline four-cylinder.
Yep.
Over here, and but when in 74 is a unique year because they had the Mark IIs in 75, and they went to a hatchback, totally revised interior.
Yeah.
So the 74 was the last of the Mark I body style, which was a solid back, no hatch,
it's
with
a trunk.
small trunk.
Yeah.
But they had the upgraded Mark II interior.
And
the gauges
and drivetrain.
And the drivetrain.
Right.
So that was highly desirable to me back then. Now, one of the things to do with that was when I had the Lotus Cortina, and of course that really wasn't a drag race machine. It was a European performance sedan with handling and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I was sitting at the top set of lights in Idlewild heading north, and what happened was a German Capri, pulled up beside me. And lights are going, off we went. And man, that Capri could pull away from me, especially in the upper end. It was a more aerodynamic body style too.
Yep.
But yeah, they were pretty strong. I remember seeing a guy ice race one in Saskatoon. He had the earlier one with the 2.6 in. So anyways, this Capri I bought, and it was kind of represented it in some ways the best of both worlds, because it was a European sedan or a two-door coupe that handled pretty good. They were known for that, but yet they had pretty good power, and but they were a pretty simple machine, easy to work on.
Yep.
And you could get quite a bit of performance parts for it. Not going down to a local speed shop, but they were. So
So when did you buy it?
Oh,
80 something?
well, I bought it here. I bought it out of Regina.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Anyway, and it was orange. Actually, that was the original color.
It was orange.
Yeah. Actually, it's be kind of cool now.
So you came to Moose Jaw, you think you told me in 87, right? Or 86?
80s. 86.
86. So that means slightly just after that is when you picked that up.
I bought it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So then I did most of the work on myself, mostly outside the shop in the compound, including painting the car myself.
Yeah.
I did the body work, painted it.
But you did a lot of cool stuff to that body. So take me through that, because I'll see if we can get maybe a picture of this thing. But rear bumper.
Well, I stripped off. They still had the big bumpers, the safety crash bumpers. So I stripped them off, which dropped a lot of weight.
Yeah.
Now, over in Europe, they didn't have those big of things. They had smaller bumperettes.
Yep.
Just like the earlier cars had here.
So did you get a set brought over?
No, I just stripped them off.
So shaved them off.
Shaved them off and then filled in the holes. And yeah, and I still have the bumpers, those bumpers. They're underneath that shed there.
So the front end, though, also has a really cool chin spoiler.
Yeah, I ordered fiberglass front chin spoiler from England, and then a rear back spoiler.
Mm-hmm.
I did that. And I did the body work to mold them both in, and yeah.
And
it actually does work. You can notice it when you're on the highway. The front end would start lifting a little bit. You could feel it, where this is way more hunkered down. You can literally feel the difference in it.
You finished it in kind of a steely powder blue, kind of medium
blue. Yeah, well,
blue.
that's what I had painted the Fiat, that color.
Okay, yeah.
And it's actually a Fiat color.
And the wheels on it, though, are
aftermarket
I
ordered
as well,
a set
right?
of Compomotive wheels from England. Now they're still 13-inch, but they're 7-inch width. And then I got the 60 series tires to fit on that. Even to this day, that era performance, like the Escorts and the Capris and the Cortina GTs and all those, they over in England, they still run 13 inches.
Which is unbelievable to think,
I know.
in the world we live in today.
Well, in North America,
yeah.
No, I understand that, but there's reasons for that. So in autocross and stuff, the smaller wheels have an advantage, and smaller wheels, it's not always an advantage to have bigger wheels.
No.
It's just a lot of that's just trend and style. And in my opinion only, they reach the point of overdoing it. So the bigger the wheel, the more unsprung weight you have, which makes your ride harsher. And you reach the point, I seen an article not that long ago where they took a Volkswagen Jetta and they put on different wheel combinations to see which was more ideal. So they went from like they went to from a 16-inch to 17-inch and stuff, and they reached the point where by the time you hit 18-inch, your car was actually running slower because they had more unsprung weight to spool up and all that stuff.
Right,
so there's
right.
trade-offs.
Yeah.
But of course, a lot of people, they just pay attention to the looks of it. But anyways, I ordered those up, and then I did all the. So I got bigger, thicker anti-sway bars and special gas pressure shocks, and the bushings in the suspension were all replaced by this urethane.
Polyurethane, yeah.
Polyurethane, and that kind of thing I did. So there were kits available. I ordered and I did all that.
Now, how about
suspension?
Engine transmission? Any work there?
Yeah, well, the transmission was stock. I didn't monkey with that, but the engine, yeah, for sure. So the engine, I had taken apart myself, and I had taken the crank and rods and got them balanced, and then I polished the rods. And by polishing the rods, you if any little nicks and stuff, they can start cracks. So
okay.
That helps there, and then I got stronger rod bolts for it. So I worked on and then I had the block board out with oversized, and I ordered the pistons from England. So the compression ratio here was like 8.2 to 1 or 8.5 to 1, something like that. It was pretty low. But over there, it was a full point higher.
Oh, wow.
So I got those stock Ford pistons from over there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it gave much higher compression. And then, but the real big change was then I got from a performance outfit in England much bigger valves, way bigger valves. And I used to do two-stroke engine porting and stuff, and I actually ported my friend who used to road race a Lotus 23B at racetracks in Gimli and Calgary and Edmonton and out near Vancouver. I forgot the name of the track, and I helped port his heads out there on Lotus engines. And anyways, but I opened up the things and the ports and everything to accept these, especially on the intakes. But they were way bigger, but it was a common thing they did over there. So over here, no. But so I had much bigger valves put in, and that way bigger flow. And then I got a Offenhauser intake, and then a small 390 CFM Holley 4-barrel. So stock would have been near a small 2-barrel Weber.
Mm-hmm.
But so now you got way more power.
Cam didn't change?
Oh, the cam. Oh yeah, I put a cam in an American cam, which I'm trying to think of the name of it now.
Okay, yeah.
But I overdid it there. I didn't go because you could get like 4 different profiles. You can go one up above stock, and then a more racier can, and then one above that, and then a full race one. I knew I didn't want the full race one. I went one down, but really, it's got a real cool lope to it, but it doesn't really kick in till after 3,000 RPM. Well, when you're driving normally, so yeah, I should have got one below that actually. So it's one change I might make down the road.
What like red line for this kind of V6? Where does that sit at?
Oh well, that is with the cam and everything. It'll and I got a dual point ignition. Of course, that's sort of much more modern electronic ignition, but that was the hot setup there. Whole different Melroy, I think, dual point distributor. So with all that done, yeah, it was a big boost in power.
And you can take the tack up to what?
Oh, it'll wind out way past 65 actually.
Yeah.
And that's some of the things why I should have backed down the cam a bit. But so yeah, and the upper end goes like heck, and it pulls. But then below 3,000, I mean, it pulls okay, but it's not flat. But I should have went more for more usable drivability, let's just say.
Well, some of my favorite memories are when I was a kid, you'd come up to Saskatoon with this car. And I remember Easter time because it was always the Dragon's Rod and Custom Car Show.
Yeah.
And it was at SaskTel Center, now, Sask Place back in the time. And I remember jumping in the back seat of that car, and you and my dad in the front. And we'd go to that show, and I'd be all starstruck with all the cars that'd be there, and I liked all kinds of goofy old stuff too. But we'd hop back in there and turn left to come out of Sask Place, and you'd wind it out on the highway, and we'd go flying back in. And of course, sorry, but my dad never drove like that, so it's one of those things that stands out in my memory the most with that cool car. So that car, has been around a long time. You've had it since like the late 80s then.
Yeah.
And you have a parts car for it still.
Yes.
And I think from what I've seen, there's one other one around, really. I mean, there might be maybe some down here in the southern part of the province, but in Saskatoon, there's like a burgundy dark brown one driving around.
Actually, yeah, I know that one. That's my friend who road raced the Lotus, and that's his son's car.
Oh, really?
So, yes. So when I go up, I always go over to visit and on Boxing Day, and he shows up, and yeah, we talk cars. So I brought him over some Capri books and everything. So he's got the one the year or two earlier, but with the 2-liter, what they call the Pinto overhead cam engine,
Okay.
which became very popular for performance modifications, actually, over the years. Matter of fact, that was even way back when people would put those motors in the back of Volkswagen Beetles.
Really?
And sand rails, yeah, that was a popular one for that. There's books out, performance modifications for it. So you actually can do a lot to those motors, but that was also the basis. They use that. That's later on. We talked about the SVO Mustang, and that was the basis for all that. They turbocharged them,
and now the car that's in the garage that you drive around right now is a pretty cool 94 Volkswagen Corrado VR6.
Yes, yeah.
And it's easy to see if we look at your history what led you to that cool European car too, because that's like for anybody who hasn't heard of VRs, I mean, sure, lots of car people listening have heard of a VR6 because they stuffed that into the Corrado, and you could get a Golf with it at one point, right, and a couple of their Volkswagens back in the early 90s. But it's like it's a V6, but it stands up quite close together, right? It's a narrow angle.
Narrow angle, yeah. So they have just one head covering, so the cylinders are staggered. So it's the idea is almost as narrow of an engine as a 4-cylinder is, but a V6.
But not as long,
right,
as an inline
6. Yeah, right. It's very long. So, and they have a very unique, very exotic sound to them. So that's part of the appeal of those engines. They're really rev easy. Stock in that day, they produced quite a bit of power. People do modify them even more. I mean, up to ridiculous levels, which you can find on almost anything now. But they're a very sweet motor. The standard Corrado, they had a supercharged 4-cylinder in there. But the VR6 are more sought after, sweeter sounding motor.
Well, and I've driven it, and all the way up to the top of the tack is just, like you said, a really unique sound, but it's so smooth. Yeah. You can hear it. You can't even feel a vibration of that, 6,000 RPM. You can't even feel it through the seat or through the gas pedal or the steering wheel. Nothing. It just sings right to the very top. But it still sounds very German though, like it doesn't sound like a Ferrari or anything like that. It has a very German sound. But that car is really cool too, because we're talking about a 2-door, call it, fastback coupe, I guess, hatch, liftback. But everybody knows about that spoiler. That was one of the coolest things, right? I mean, it has a power lifting spoiler.
That's right. Stock, they had that. Now, some of the modern supercars have that.
Sure, yeah.
But that's the first one that I'm aware of anyways. Maybe somebody can correct this, but that was the first one to come standard with that. So at a certain speed, I think it's like once you get over 80 kilometers an hour, the spoiler pops up and lifts by itself.
Yeah.
And in Europe, it doesn't pop up till a higher speed, but in North America, they brought, because we don't travel at Autobahn speed. So then when you come near a stop, then it comes back down.
Yeah.
By itself.
Some other neat things is like that would have been a very early car. Like it was a a performance sports car with a bit of a luxury flair. And what I mean by that is, it had heated Recaro seats, right?
Yep.
And even had the little pressurized headlight washers, right? I mean,
it was a very expensive car. Too. It was designed actually to compete against in Europe, the Porsche 944s.
Okay, yeah.
So it was designed to compete against that kind of thing. And there's a lot of unique things about it. But it is a front-wheel drive. But you can't notice the torque steer you can on most front-wheel drive. It has a very unique differential in it that somehow they got that so you can't notice it even when you're really giving her. You don't have that. So there's a lot of it was a performance coupe for sure, and the gearing it's a 5-speed standard, and it's designed unlike a lot of other 5-speeds, which fifth was overdrive. This is not. So it does rev in fifth fairly high if you're not used to it, but it's designed to pull red line and at its top speed.
Right.
So most of the overdrives, they won't pull red line at their top speed.
No.
They sort of don't have enough juice. So this will. So even in fifth gear, when you go to pass, you punch it and you don't have to downshift. It goes. It really goes.
Yeah.
So it was remarkably a lot of power for that size of a motor, which is 2.8 liter VR6. Yes.
So you've had a couple of other vehicles, an F-150, a Ford Ranger, some North American stuff here and there, a few other things. But why do you think as a whole, we've talked about the history of all the stuff you've had. What is it the most that draws you towards the European stuff? Especially growing up in the late 60s, early 70s and stuff like that, when you had lots of friends who were, probably some who liked what you drove too, but certainly the idea back then was GTOs and Corvettes and Mustangs and all that stuff. What was it that drew you to all this?
Yeah, well, we talked a little bit about that before, but we also missed one car. Now it was the CRX SI I had for many years, which you drove.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
That was the one that was out different in a way. Wasn't a European thing, but
no, but it was very light. They only weighed a little over 1,800 pounds. And that was a 1987,
right?
Yes.
Honda CRX SI.
SI, yeah. So fuel injection, and that was the performance one. They had a standard CRX, but that was the SI. And they're like little go-karts when you're traveling. They're actually pretty practical car. They got really good fuel economy. And remarkably enough, even though they're light and everything, you wouldn't think so. They actually stick to icy roads really well. It's sort of the wedge shape. The wind, the aerodynamics tends to suck it down to the road. So actually, they were pretty good that way. So the Corrado was actually, I never thought about it, but I had people say, well, that looks like your CRX. And I looked, and I wasn't thinking about it that way, but it sort of was a little bit. A little
bit of a stretched out. It's a little bit longer, certainly.
Yeah, well, and the CRX did not have back seats. It was a two-seater.
Only, yeah.
And then it had that. But anyway, so, because that one I had for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so then we get to the questions you're asking me about what influenced that. And you suggested maybe it was because I lived in Germany for a while and I seen those cars, and it could have been that I read a lot of the magazines, like instead of reading Hot Rod, which I did read a little bit of those, which caters to the American performance crowd there. The car magazines like Car and Driver, Road and Track that type,
That's what you
of
what
thing.
you grew up reading.
Yeah, I grew up reading that, and so I always so the
You know, I even have a theory too, though,
What?
is that not just your time in Germany, but simply the fact that your first car was something European, right?
well, that probably was a contributing factor.
And your dad, my grandpa, continued to buy some European stuff throughout the years, even after they got back to Canada. There was Volkswagens and other things that showed up randomly, little European cars, right? So it must have had a pretty big influence that way as well,
Yeah, I don't know. I just was, to me, I look on it as a natural. I always like the smaller cars, and
Yeah.
I know that even in trucks too, that I prefer the older style Ranger size truck.
Yeah.
And I do have an F-150, but I don't like driving it. It's a big tank by comparison. Now I'm realizing I'm the odd duck here because obviously the majority of people like driving these big vehicles. I'm scratching my head trying to figure out why they like to drive these big things. And we were talking about in the 70s how the big American cars, you got Grand Marquis, all those big American cars, they were big boats, and we used to kind of call them yank tanks. We kind of poke fun. So whenever you're in a group, or not a group, but something you're into, maybe you poke fun at the other side.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But that's what your mom and dad drove, and the big American stuff, and then their parents and everything. So maybe some of that's a little bit of revolt against that type of thing,
Okay,
going
yeah.
the opposite. That could have been some of it. I don't know, because as we were talking a little bit earlier, that when you were really young, we're talking 4 or 5 years old, he was always a car guy. And what did he want? He wanted a 1932 Mercedes-Benz.
Yeah.
So go figure that. He didn't want a 67 Mustang or slammed Civic. He wanted this old stuff from
Yeah.
the 30s, 40s, and whatnot. And he worked his way to the 50s in his natural taste. I could see that. I was scratching my head and going, what the hell? But so
It was always about the style for me, though. That's part of it. I mean, the stuff that you're into is very good looking and quite cool, but it's about handling and performance. When I was just a kid, it was just the artistry of it. That's, I think, what drew me to that early, big swoopy fenders and all that kind of stuff out of the 20s and 30s and things like that. But I mean, I guess that's what it comes down to, is just sometimes it's hard to explain your interest or why you really like something.
Your taste is your taste,
Yeah.
and it gets to be, you really can't always explain it. So it's one of those things. Yeah, but I'm always naturally so sure. If we're at a car show and say there's a modern Mustang, say, or a Camaro, and I like them. But if there's a European, if there's a Porsche or something over there, no, now I'm really looking at that more so. And for a lot of practical reasons, I wish I did have more of a passion for that other stuff, because it's much more easier to get service and parts and buy, and they're generally a little more reliable, I think, than some of the European stuff. But it wasn't just the European, also the smaller Japanese stuff too. Again, your grandpa's, my dad's Civic.
Yeah, for my
And
first car.
That's,
Yeah.
That now, to see that's really small.
Oh, that would
But
be.
the Civics before that were even smaller.
That's right.
So physically, and everything's got. So if you look at a Civic now, man, that's a big car. It's bigger than the Accords used to be.
It is. It is.
And it's big. They kept getting bigger and bigger.
Well,
and bigger.
we are certainly on that swing again, and call it the swing that we saw. It'd be similar to the swing we saw in the 70s that you grew up in. And what I'm saying is, because you grew up in the late 60s and into the 70s, and you saw cars just keep getting bigger, right? Because by the mid 70s, we were talking about the biggest cars that we ever had, right?
Yeah. Well, you take a Thunderbird, for example.
Right. Started out as a sports car in 1955.
Yeah, about the size of the original Corvette, too.
Right, yeah. And then the Thunderbird by the late 70s was a gargantuan car.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But here we are seeing the same thing, right? We're seeing the demise now in 2021. There's very few subcompact cars for sale, cheap little cars. There's almost none. In fact, Ford has stopped making cars. Chevy is just about done making cars. Like, there's almost no little cars. We're into big SUVs. Trucks are the number one selling thing. So we're on that big swing upwards again, right?
Right.
I'll bet you we'll still see another return to some small stuff.
Yeah, there's already getting to be a little bit uncertain. So the millennials, there's a bit of a little start of a, what I call a backlash.
Well,
so they see all the stuff.
Yeah.
And yeah, we were talking earlier that so if you got a big American car in the 70s and say it was 4,500 pounds, oh my God, that's a lead sled. That's a thing. Well, these SUVs way more than that now.
Oh, absolutely. Most of them. Yeah, most of them driving around.
And even a small SUV weighs quite a bit. And what they call mid-sized truck. 5,000 pounds is mid-size, so yeah, you're right.
I guess
I look on that from the aspect, also being in the motorcycle business.
Yeah.
So sport bikes, they could take a sport bike that was really light, aluminum frame and everything, and they could take it and, unbelievable, knock off 40 pounds off something that weighed 450 pounds.
Right.
And they could knock, and it was all incremental stuff. So a little bit lighter bolt, a little bit lighter bracket, all the stuff adds up. And so when I look at cars, I go, well, there's just a ton of potential to drop some of the weight. But I guess they're not as interested in doing that. So lighter weight makes everything more efficient, get better fuel economy and everything.
I think they struggle with that. I have a feeling that the auto manufacturers struggle with that slightly because of ever-changing safety requirements.
Yeah, the safety thing plays a big role.
Because even the latest, newest test that came out only 3 or 4 years ago, the small impact front crash test, where so an old crash test, you'd smash up a car, the whole front end would be crushed, right? Then they moved to half the width of the front end of the vehicle. Well, now they do one that's a quarter of the width. So the entire force of the impact is forced on just a quarter, the very outside edge of the vehicle. And what they found is that that's a majority of how crashes happen. People try to miss or try to avoid one another, but they still end up crashing. But most of the vehicles that were in those tests were failing. So they actually had to add more metal to the front of the vehicle to be able to survive those tests. But you know what? I think personally, I'd rather have a car that I don't, if I get in a crash and my legs stay on, versus one that just gets better fuel economy. Like, yeah, I think the safety is important.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, anyways, obviously, the SUVs are selling like crazy.
Yep.
Not that many regular cars are selling anymore. And from my vantage point, my viewpoint, and everything, most of them are pretty ugly. And I go, wow, where's everybody's taste these days? But yeah, no, the practicality and all that comes into play. You got a family moving around, so that doesn't. So for an SUV, they may think that's a pretty good looking SUV. For me, I'm looking compared to cars. Oh. There's very few that I say when I'm reading some articles.
Yeah.
I'll read them on the SUVs, and they'll go, well, this is a good-looking SUV, and I'm going, what? What are they talking about? That thing looks hideous, as I'm thinking. But that's me. Obviously, I'm different than most of them. Again, like, I'd rather drive a much smaller truck. So, like we talked about, so Ford, for example, is coming out with what they call the Maverick, which is a compact truck again to offer, and everybody sort of abandoned that segment all at once, and I was scratching my head going, well, there's still a lot of people that would prefer it, especially in bigger urban centers,
Yeah.
So the old original, which I have, of course, 86 Ranger, and of course GM had something to compete, Mazda and Nissan and Toyota had them.
They all did.
But then they all went up in size.
The old
so-called Tacoma, went up in size, and they call it a midsize, and it's not that much smaller than my 2002 Ford F-150, actually.
Yeah.
In physical size, just a little bit. But that's the way things went. So people obviously in the masses wanted these bigger things and to do that. And they're selling like crazy. So, hey, that's what works. So that's what generates the profits.
I still think it's good, though, to have a variety of people. So I think it's great that you got that taste because
Yeah.
it's influenced me too. I like small cars. I like it all though. I've got a big gigantic 19-foot yacht from 1969, and I've got a 2012 Honda Fit Sport.
Yeah,
one of the smallest cars you can buy in the market right now, and I love them both. So
I remember when he had that Civic, and then he was telling me he was going to buy an old Civic out of California with no rust. One of the earlier ones. Well, it was around 1980 or something.
Yeah, it was an 81 as well.
And I was kind of, huh? And then the next thing you know, he buys this giant Buick.
Yeah.
So what? But I wasn't aware as much for some reason as the family background to do with the Buicks.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until you had that display that, okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
So your dad had a Buick and your grandpa had a Buick.
Yeah, your dad had a bunch of Buicks too, right?
That's right. So I got it a little bit more, and it's sort of fun. But anyways, I was just amazed how things have gone, and you're right. Still, I think they could apply a lot more technology even to SUVs and trucks to make them a lot lighter.
I'm sure they
get better
could.
Fuel economy, the physics. So if you're trying to stop a heavy vehicle versus a light vehicle, the light vehicle is going to stop a lot faster, given good brakes and stuff. So. And they can go, I look at that stuff and they could go a long ways. But obviously they haven't had the motivation to do it, so they don't bother. So you take something like Lotus was renowned for cutting weight out of things. And so a Lotus Elan from the 60s, a Lotus Elan weighed something like 1,500 pounds.
Nothing.
1,500 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, a story to do with that was when my friend Alan was road racing the Lotus 23B race car. We were at the Edmonton Raceway, and he became B and C Sports race champion for quite a few years there.
Cool.
And back in that era, and but at these races there'd be different categories of cars, and So they could be out at the same time, but they weren't really racing the same race. So one time, there was a full race, 67 Corvette 427, full race. The setup was lighting and everything. So they were both on the track. So the Lotus 23B had it was punched out to a big bore 1650 with Cosworth pistons and everything.
Cool.
But the Lotus 23B weighed something like 1,150 pounds.
Nothing.
And so they're going around the Edmonton track, and part of the Edmonton track, they long straightaway they used as a drag race course other weekends. But when the road race there, so the top then cut around. But anyways, they had this thing called bridge turn. Another bridge turn was quite a sharp turn, and they'd come out on a long straightaway. So they really weren't racing against each other, but they were in there, and I knew my friend was going to have some fun here. I could see him. He was way out front in his class, so now he's slowly catching up to this Corvette. And they're coming out of the bridge turn once, and I could see them going down the straight, and they're kind of neck and neck.
Mm-hmm.
And I waited. Then the next time go around, I knew what was going to happen. I knew my friend well enough. So they come out of the bridge turn, and the Corvette punches it, and Alan punches it. And geez, if he doesn't pull the Corvette in at the end of the long straight. And now you can hear the Corvette guy. He's whiny. He's ticked off, and he's probably, this little dinky four-cylinder ahead of me, even though they weren't racing in the same thing. And so he was winding that motor up more and more and more. And on the one, but the thing is, the Corvette weighs more. So then when he's having his brakes are overheating because he's getting on the brakes harder to try to close up the gap again. And so just a series, and he's winding his motor up more, using the brakes more. So his brakes are overheating, they're fading, and he's winding the motor up. So down a long backstretch, hear this thing winding up, and then kaboom! And the thing blew up so hard that some of the engine parts went right through the hood. I'm not kidding you. That was he just
and you know
totally destructed.
It's all about perspective because from a North American standpoint, the Corvette was light.
Yes,
right.
No, you're right.
You know,
right. Fiberglass body.
Fiberglass body, and
it used to be originally when it started in the 50s. Again, like the Thunderbird was designed sort of to compete against it.
Yep.
But more luxuries. It was a genuine sports car, and it was fairly small. Then they over time they made it bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But still, even at the end, it was not exceedingly heavy because he has a fiberglass body.
Yeah, but it's funny because it's all perspective, right?
Yes.
You could stand there, everybody with a big block,
Right.
you know, like you say, the Cuda or whatever. You stand there, that light little Corvette, you know, and then the way you're talking about it, though, and here's this Lotus going by and you know, blowing the Corvette up.
So that's the clear example of lightweight. Power. It's power to weight. But most people don't think about that, power to weight. They think just more power. They're not looking at the weight. And I see that in ATVs, modern off-road ATVs.
Yep.
You know? So some of these makes got bigger and bigger motors and everything, and they weigh just an unbelievable amount. So an ATV that weighs 200 pounds lighter, well, that's like a big rider sitting on back.
Yeah.
But they have a smaller motor. Well, guess what? Off-road, lightweight rules, and so this way smaller engine thing can overtake this big honking thing.
Yep.
But anyways, so
thanks. This has been enlightening. Thanks for sharing. That's good. I think it's lots of fun and lots of good stories. And for pictures, go to jthomasauto.ca. And always you're going to find more stories just like this. You know, whether it's European or it's North American, but we're here to share good car stories. So thanks for joining us. I'm Jay Thomas. Thanks for listening to Bald Tires.